Hi friends, welcome to my channel. My name is Lynn and I have a bit of a 2-for-1 for you. I am flipping the Spellbinders April 2025 Club Kids, and I'm also flipping my recipe card number 2 Eclipse style cards. And so all of my cards are going to be some form of an Eclipse or Eclipse inspired card. And as well, I'm going to feature the Spellbinders clubs. As per usual for my flip videos, I'll be making at least one flat, one layered, one interactive, and one pop-up card. But in this video in total, I'm actually going to make 5 cards. And I'm featuring the 3D embossing folder, Glimmer of the Month, Stencil of the Month, Small Die of the Month, and as well the clear stamp and die of the month. So here's a look at all 5 cards, and because this video tends to be on the long side, I'm going to timestamp it so you can jump straight to the card you want to see me make. Okay, so let's start off with my flat card. Now, for my Eclipse cards, generally I add a lot of dimension because the whole idea behind an Eclipse card is that you take a beautiful background, you cut right into it, but you inlay those pieces back in so that the background is still seamless and you can still enjoy the beauty of that background panel. And often I use this for things like scenes or backgrounds that are just really lovely on their own and I can't bear to cover with additional mats and layers. And so I will generally use a word die to cut into my panel. And that's typically what I've seen, but definitely you can do a lot of other things because the whole idea is that you cut into your design and then you inlay your design back in. Now, because we're inlaying the exact same design back in place, it's going to get lost in the design and it will be hard to actually discern what it was that you die cut out unless you do something to pop it up, make it more noticeable. And so in this case, because I've defined a flat card as just the card base plus at most one additional layer, I can't use foam. So I am going to show you an alternative. Now, what I've started to do here is I have white heat embossed the clear stamp of the month twice to fill out this A2 size card. This is directly onto my card base, and I heat embossed white on white. You could also use clear embossing powder if you prefer, because I'm using that as a resist, and then I'm going to ink right over everything. So the effect of this is that because the embossing powder is an enamel, it will actually resist the ink that I am applying. And so the result is that we're going to color in all of that empty space between, inside those outlined images. And it's a little bit hard to see the design now because I'm using rather light colors, but as I add more to especially the darker or bottom end of this card panel, you'll see the design come through a little bit better because there'll be more contrast. But as well, I'm going to wipe down everything so that the ink that's sitting on top of that embossed design wipes away and you can more clearly see it. Even in the lighter areas, you can more clearly see it. So with a general Eclipse style card, what you would do is die cut typically a word, but really it could be anything. You would die cut right into this pattern. So I'm going to use a T ruler here to make sure that my lettering is straight and perpendicular. I opened up my card because remember I did all of that stenciling right onto the card base. So I'm going to die cut right through the front of my card and only the front of my card. And what I'm going to do is instead of layering die cuts on top of the card base, I'm actually going to glue these letters to the inside of my card. And so that's how I'm going to cheat a little bit and have some dimension and some layers, but not exceed my limit for how I've defined a flat card. I chose to use the stitching alphabet die set from Spellbinders, but I'm not actually going to do any stitching. So there's actually two reasons why I use this die set. The first is that it's large, and I like the scale of this larger font for a design like the Eclipse card, because it's really, I mean, the pattern is the star. It's sort of the lead of the show. And then I would say the lettering is the supporting character. So I want it to be large, and I want it to be bold so that it's more legible and more noticeable. And so the other reason why I chose it is because it does die cut through all of those little holes, which I think also then makes it a little bit easier to read the letters and to pick out the letters from that busy design that we stamped. Now, I did die cut everything a second time out of black cardstock, and I took a black marker and inked up the edges of the original die cut so that it has a little bit of that black peeking through, but you don't really need it a ton because we die cut through our card front, it does have this natural tendency to look a little bit recessed because the card isn't going to lay completely flat. It sort of hovers a little bit. And so when it hovers, it makes the lettering look recessed, and then it looks, it stands out, but from the background. So it does help to make it a little bit more legible. And I'm going to stamp an extra sentiment from the clear stamp of the month onto the inside of this card to complete this. And it's a really simple, easy card. I love Eclipse cards for when you have a gorgeous pattern and you want that background to be the star of your card, or you're just looking for something nice and simple and easy to put together. So that's how easy it is to kind of do an Eclipse style card, but keep your card still relatively flat because the layers, it's still only 2 layers of cardstock, but once you open it, you still preserve the sentiment, making it definitely legible and as well not super bulky. Okay, so now onto my layered card. Now, this is going to be a little bit more standard to how I would normally do an Eclipse style card, but I'm still going to give it a little bit of a twist. So I'm featuring the Glimmer of the Month, and these are panels that I already hot foiled. I foiled it directly onto black foil onto white cardstock. And that's this version here. I'm going to do the exact same thing, use a T-square ruler to really line this up so that it's nice and perpendicular. And then what I did is from the remnant piece of foil that was left over, I used a solid hot foil plate and foiled that onto a second panel so that you use all of your foil and nothing goes to waste. And plus you get 2 panels to craft from. And if you don't have a solid hot foil plate, but you have a better press plate that's one of the larger designs like an A2 or 5x7 design, just flip your better press plate so that the solid flat side is facing you, and you can use that as a solid foil plate. Now I'm doing a little bit of a 2-for-1 card. So because, where I lined up my panel might be a little bit different each time, I took my white panel, put it on top of my black panel, and I'm lining it up so that the design matches up exactly. Because what I'm going to do is die cut the same 2 letters out, and then when I go to assemble the cards, I'm going to swap them so that the black letters are on top of the white background panel. The white letters will be on top of the black background panel. But in order for the illusion to kind of work, the design has to be seamless. And when you glimmer this design, it's actually larger than than A2. And so when I placed my panel that was exactly cut to A2, and I glimmered it, I might have sort of, not centered it exactly, or, aligned it exactly the same between the white panel, the first one, and the second panel, which I did the off piece of foil, or the remnant piece of foil. And so by lining it up and then transferring the dyes, it ensures that the pattern is going to be seamless. Now on the black panel, since I didn't square my letters to the edges of that panel, I'm gonna trim down both panels. And when I go to trim down that black panel, I'll just trim it down, making sure that the letters are perpendicular and that everything is straight and lined up. Now I do the black card off camera, so you're not going to actually see me make that one, but I will finish the white version and then show you both at the end. So the stitching alphabet die set is really great, but it is a lot of weeding to poke out all of those little holes. But I do like the look of it, even without the stitching. And you could definitely do the stitching, and that would also really help to make those letters stand out more, especially when you are inlaying the exact same letters back in. But I thought a different way of playing with an Eclipse style card would be to do this fun 2-for-1 where you mix up between the two, and then you definitely have lettering that is very legible, very clear to see, but you still preserve that entire design. So I've got my black panel started here for my first card, and I'm gonna trim this down to 4 by 5 1/4. I'll trim the black panel down as well, but I don't trim it exactly perpendicular like I'm able to do here. I trimmed that black panel so that the letters were perpendicular or nice and horizontal, and then I trimmed off the edges to make sure that everything was nice and square. And so I'm just going to glue this down to my card base here. And it looks great even when you don't inset the letters back in, but to have that sort of Eclipse look where the design is seamless, I'm going to inlay this back in. But because of all the little holes there, and I don't want to have to die cut this out like 3-4 more times, because all of those holes take so long for me to weed out. Normally, if you were using something solid, I would just maybe die cut the same letters 3-4 times to have that dimension. But instead, what I'm gonna do is just use some black foam. And since my foam has adhesive only on one side, I can put the side that doesn't have any adhesive facing up. And so now it still looks seamless. It just looks, like there's shadow where those holes are, and I don't have to weed out more of these stitching letters and poke out all of those little holes. But that is an alternative. So if you're using a die that doesn't have all these little holes that you have to weed out, you could, as an alternative, die cut the same thing 3-4 times, stack it up, and then get your dimension that way. But on the white version, I just use my white foam, which is the same. It only has adhesive on one side, and I have a nice inverted look. Okay, now on to my interactive card. And for this, I am going to make a shaker card. But I want to start off with a little bit of stenciling. I have the stencil of the month, which has 5 stencils. The first 3 help you to stencil out these little mini envelopes. The first layer stencils the bottom of the envelope, and I'm actually going to use the same ink for all 3 layers of the envelope. The second layer gives you the 2 sides. Now, when I stencil layers 2 and layer 3, I am actually being careful not to be heavy-handed, and every time I ink up, I actually tap it onto my glass mat to remove a little bit of ink. And that way I can get progressively lighter and lighter shades of gray. And that's just one way to kind of stretch your, if you don't have a ton of inks, then just use the same ink pad, but go a little bit more light-handed and then build it up gradually. So that's why I keep lifting the design on and off and peeking underneath. It's just to see if I have enough ink there, because I'm trying to start with a very, very light hand and only add as much as needed. Stencil number 4 is a little bit of double duty. It helps you to stencil the little wax seal, a little dot that goes onto the envelope flap. And as well, stencil number 4 is one of 2 stripy borders that you can add to your A2 panel. So these are sized for an A2 card. And so one of the things, especially with this stencil, because it is a little bit of a 2-for-1, I would use a smaller blending brush or a detail blending brush like this one, so that you can really just ink up the area that you want and you don't have to worry about masking off, because this particular stencil, this is layer 4, it has the dots in the center, but it's also got the stripes around the border. And if you don't want to ink up, one or the other, then having a small detail blending brush like this, it just helps you to, just get ink where you want it. And typically with this stripy design, I think normally it's for international letters, where I think the more common combination is red and blue. But I'm going to ink up with gray and blue. Just because red's a really strong color. So I wasn't sure how much of it I really wanted, especially since this is right onto my card base. And so it's meant to really be kind of the background, and red just kind of screams at you as I tend to try to use it more as where like a focal image where I want to really attract your eyes. And so I try to be a little bit conservative with where I use red. But this is all done here. And so that's my card base. And the envelope was onto a different card panel, which I'm going to layer on top. So I'm going to cut this. I inked up the full A2 panel, but I'm actually going to cut this down so that it just sits nicely framed inside that stripy border that I inked onto my card base. And I just wanted it to be large enough still, though, so that I can die cut my sentiment through, because again, I'm gonna kind of put a little bit of a twist onto an Eclipse style card. And so as you see me do before, I'm going to use my T-square ruler to line up my letters, die cut right through that panel. And then I'm going to position this little panel so that it's nice and centered in the frame. And I traced that letter, the aperture of the letters onto my card base. And I'm going to die cut through the front of my card as well. So this is kind of similar to what I did with my flat card, where I die cut the letters through the card front, and ultimately I'm going to adhere the letters into the inside of the card. Now the Stitch Alphabet die set, it actually does come with a second die that has the shadow layer. And so I thought it would be fun to use that on the inside as well. And so I'm going to position the letters that I die cut out of that stenciled background. And those are going to get glued into the inside of my card. And because they've got the extra shadow layer, that's why I've kind of positioned them, and then I'm going to close my card flat on top just to make sure everything's lined up straight and that you see the design through the front. But then when you open it, you have that nice shadow or the bubble layer behind it. And so once I get that nice and adhered down, I am actually going to make a shaker panel out of that stenciled panel that I cut into. So to turn this into a shaker element, I am first going to line it with some clear acetate. And this doesn't have to be super thick or expensive stuff. So you can use your thin, inexpensive acetate, or I've seen people use like cello bags also, that your stamps come in. You could use that too, because you don't really need it for structure. You just need it to really close that aperture opening. And then, as with any other shaker, what you would want to do is create a shaker well, or an opening, where you have an enclosed area that you can pour in your shaker bits, whatever it is that you want to have move around inside this shaker. Now I'm adhering some foam, and the main thing that you want to be mindful of is to make sure this is completely enclosed, because if you leave anything open, then your shaker bits might fall out. So just make sure everything is all of your foam butts up against one another so that you have this completely enclosed area. I added a little bit extra just so that it makes this piece a little bit more solid, for one, but also so that your shaker bits don't fall into an area that is not going to be visible. Because, for example, on the one end of the letter H, there's a little bit more cardstock there because I plan to put my snail over there. And so that's just got a lot of empty cardstock. And if I didn't put that second strip of foam, a lot of your shaker bits could roam over into that area, but they wouldn't be seen at all. So just to kind of conserve on your shaker bits and really maximize what's visible, I like to put the foam as close to the aperture opening as possible. And that way, as much of it as possible is actually visible. So now that I've filled out my shaker bits, I am going to close this entire thing off with a second layer of acetate. I always do my shaker elements this way because then you have this completely enclosed element that you can then put onto your card base. And for me, it's just a lot easier to line up. But for this card specifically, the card base has a hole cut through it as well. So you can't really do that trick of piling your shaker bits onto your card base and then putting the top of your shaker element onto it. So for this style card, you kind of have to do it this way. But I do all of my shaker cards this way because it's just so much easier for me to line it up when I go to put this onto the card base itself. Now, the only consideration when you go to line this up is to actually try to get it so that the two aperture openings will line up. So now that I finally got that position exactly where I want, I can continue to decorate the rest of this card. The darling little snail here is from the small die of the month, which you can outfit your snail with a little hat and a little messenger bag so that he can be a little postal carrier. And the die set has so much more beyond just the snail. It's got a mailbox, which you can have open or close, and complete with the little flag indicator to show whether there's mail to be picked up or not. And then there's even some floral dies as well, some little envelopes, and a cute little worm. Super cute. And I'm gonna just use the snail on this card, but I did also stamp out another sentiment from the clear stamp of the month. The cool thing with the coordinating dies with the clear stamp is that you have dies for all of the sentiments, but you also have dies to cut out those images that are part of that collage stamp. And so if you wanted to use those as individual elements, you totally could because you have the die to cut them out individually. I really, really love that because it helps you to get so much out of your stamp because it's already collaged up as a single stamp and you get all of those images in one stamping, but then you have the individual dies that will cut out each of those individual graphics, and then you can also use them standalone if you didn't want to use the full collaged look. Really, really awesome. I love how they've designed that. So to finish my card, I am going to glue down my snail here. And I don't mind that he's going to cover up a little bit of the aperture opening here. And then same with the sentiment. So I'm going to glue this down right over the sentiment. And I'm not too worried about legibility at this point because there's so much going on over the letters. You've got the stitching, you've got the shaker bits. So it's really when you open the card, you're going to really see everything and you'll see the sentiment much better. Okay, so now onto my last card, which will be my pop-up card. So for the front of the card, I'm going to feature the 3D embossing folder. And because I still want this to be an Eclipse style card, I'm going to die cut first and then emboss because I want to preserve all of that dimension that the 3D embossing folder will give you. And so if you embossed your panel first and then you lined up your die and die cut next, you're going to have to run it through your die cutting machine again, and you might actually flatten out some of that dimension. For this card, I thought it might be interesting to actually use a shape instead of using letters. And so I know that typically with an Eclipse style card, the die that you choose to cut into your pattern is your sentiment, and that way you have the design, which is seamless across the die cut, and you've got your sentiment on your card as well. But I'm gonna make a pop-up card, so really the all the action, all the fun is going to be on the inside of the card, which is how I define a pop-up card. And so I'm gonna keep the outside pretty plain and and simple. So I'm going to take both pieces and give it a light spritzing of water. That just helps to soften the paper fibers so that when you run this through, your cardstock is less likely to crack, but more likely to just take on that beautiful embossed pattern. The 3D embossing folder this month is this really cool postage collage design. It is really awesome. It's got a lot of, and it's not like a repeat pattern. So when you look at it, it's got fully unique designs. And what's really cool about it is that you can actually emboss this. And then if you wanted, you could actually like just take a paper trimmer or a craft knife and cut out the individual stamps if you want. I think that would be another fun way to craft with this this embossing folder because it's got full stamp designs, and so you could definitely kind of use each of them as individual stamps if you want. And I really love that. It's a nice full tile of kind of like a mosaic tile of these stamps. Now I'm going to make a pop-up sort of platform. So the first score line I scored so that it is going to be below the frame. So depending on whatever shape you use to die cut from through that first panel and through your card front, because I actually also cut through my card front, that is the height, or that is the first score line. And then your second score line needs to create a space that is going to be completely covered by your die cut. And in total, the width of this, I'm just using scraps and I'm cutting it to the size that I need. So the width of this just also needs to be covered by your die cut. And so ultimately, mine ends up being 1/2 inch for that first score line. The next section is 2.5 inches. And so I scored at 3. And then you just repeat those dimensions, 1/2 inch and then 2.5. And that first one, I scored a little bit smaller, and so this is the one that I just gave you dimensions for: 1/2 inch, then 3, 3.5, and then what's left over doesn't really matter. You just need enough to glue it down, but if you want, it should be another full 2.5 inches, and then you can cut it off. And so when you're looking at this, it's going to build a little platform or a stage that is 1/2 inch tall and 2.5 inches wide. And the length of it is just going to depend on your die cut. So my rectangle that I die cut out of the postage frame or postage embossed panel and through my card front, you just need that platform to be smaller than that because we want to cover it up completely. So we're looking at the inside of my card now, and I'm using that same stencil of the month, but the border design part of what I called earlier stencil number 4. And then I am using the 5th stencil to add the second set of stripes. And here I did go with the more classic red and blue stripes that you would see, I think, on international letters. And so I'm going to stencil this design. Again, this is on the inside of the card. So I want to dress up the inside a little bit more because I always like that whole idea that, oh, somebody gets a card and it looks kind of plain, really simple on the outside, but then when they open it, it just, I feel, creates more of a wow factor when there's a lot going on on the inside. So while everything is nice and flat still, I will glue this frame down. So this was that embossed panel that I die cut a rectangular aperture out of, and then I embossed. And when I die cut this out, I actually die cut through both the panel and through my card base so that everything lines up as perfectly as I could manage. And so I've got this aperture going straight through to the inside of my card. Now I've got my pop-up platform mechanism here, and I'm going to really burnish this so that it's got a nice crisp fold, but also so that it will fold down as flat as possible, because ultimately this card's going to have a lot of dimension, but all of that dimension is going to be sandwiched on the inside of the card. So to start to glue this down, I'm going to put some strong adhesive and a little bit of liquid glue just on that first section that is 1/2 inch tall. I'm going to line this up so that it is butting up against the fold, but it doesn't cross over the fold. So I want to make sure that this card still folds down nice and flat. And if you put this mechanism so that it crosses into the fold, it creates extra bulk where you want it to be flat and you want it to fold. And so you just want to go right up next to where you see your fold line, but don't cross over. And it's not super important, but I just tried to center this left to right so that I have space for what's going to happen next, which is going to be the swing mechanism as well. So this pop-up is going to have a couple of different mechanisms to it. But first we need the platform. Kind of sets the stage for this card. Now I'm going to fold that exactly in half. Put a little bit more strong double-sided adhesive. I put it nice to the edges, and then I'm going to squiggle on some liquid adhesive. So this gets me adhesive all the way to the edge, but the liquid adhesive is what will make this very, permanently stuck down. Now, when you apply your adhesive, just put it onto that section that is closest to the score line so that you've got the rise here of the platform. So you can see it, the height of it is about 1/2 inch. It just needs to be lower than the aperture that you've cut out so that it's hidden by the frame of the front of the card. And then the size of the stage itself just needs to be covered by your die cut. Now, to maximize the elements that you can have swinging out, you really just want to kind of try to make that platform as close to the size of your die cut as possible. I think I could have gone even just a little bit larger, but I made it work with what I cut out. But the idea is that you actually can have some elements pop out and swing out as another surprise element. So here I've got these strips of 1/2 inch cardstock, and I just want to score a little triangle. Now both of these strips are 1/2 inch, so if you butt them up so that they're square against one another, and then you line it up, you can get a perfect triangle. It's not super important that you get a perfect triangle, but if you wanted, that's one way to do it. And this is going to be our swing mechanism. Now, I'm just using some scraps and having to cut this down to size. Ultimately, whatever length or depth that your platform is, that's the maximum of how long this swing arm can be. So remember, I cut this to 2.5 inches. Well, this little swing mechanism piece I'm holding in my right hand, the longest it can be is 2.5 inches. And I'm going to do a little bit of a dry run. So I just put some dotty tape runner on just the triangle. And I'm going to position it under my platform and close my card down onto it so that it adheres to the front of the card. So I tested that out, and now I can put my liquid adhesive. So here's how you position that. You just want to position it so that the short edge is right up against, but not crossing over your fold line. And it should point towards you when you're opening the card so that it's perpendicular. And you should only have adhesive on the little triangle so that when you open this up, it actually swings out and reveals whatever you have attached to it. Okay, so then now we want to attach our embossed panel to this platform. I just have some scrap cardstock here, and I folded it in half. And the size of this, it doesn't really matter. You don't need anything too large, but the idea is that you want to attach your panel to this folded bit of cardstock so that when you open it up, it will actually tilt up and tilt forward a little bit. Because if you glued it down flat to your platform, it's not going to kind of stand up and present itself nicely when the card is open. And so that's that's such a simple mechanism so that it has that effect where it tilts. So one thing I didn't do, but I would definitely recommend, is die cut that same rectangle a second time. And that way, this panel, it's going to be a little bit more structured, a little bit thicker. I die cut it originally out of 100-pound cover weight cardstock, Spellbinders, really nice solid color cardstock. So it is pretty thick, but I still would recommend backing it with a second layer. And that way it's going to be more structured. And later, I think when you open and close it a lot more, it's gonna be a lot less kind of fragile. Because I found opening and closing this, especially playing with it a lot to test it, it actually felt like it was starting to, especially at the corners, get a little bit beat up. Because when you open and close this, it needs to kind of fit right back exactly inside that aperture in order to open and close smoothly. And so if it's too tight of a fit and your cardstock is too soft, it might actually get a little bit banged up in the corners. I think adding a second layer of cardstock would have helped a lot. Now, I've got my one swing arm here, and I decided, well, why have one when you can add two? Because I thought it would be kind of cool to have these cute little envelopes pop out, but it kind of looks very small and not impressive, just that one little envelope popping out. So I put together a snail from the small die of the month, and I'm gonna have the cute little snail pop out. I thought originally the snail was gonna be too big, but he actually can fit. Now, one of the things that you want to do is just put a little bit of temporary adhesive on your swing arm and just test your mechanism. See, you need to be able to position this so that it can still fold down. And the only space you have to work with is the size of that original platform pop-up that you made. And so if you maximize the size of that platform, you're going to maximize also the potential of what you can have pop out. And so I think I could have gone a little bit larger, but you'll see at the end why I left myself some extra space, because I actually stamped out an additional sentiment. And so so those are some things that you might want to consider when you custom fit your pop-up mechanism, because really it can be whatever size that you want, and it also depends on the die cut element that you chose initially when you die cut the embossed panel and the aperture through the card front. But I was really happy that the snail, I was prepared to kind of, clip the snail a little bit if I needed to make him fit, but it's nice that he fits without having to actually cut him down any. And so I decided to make a second little swing arm, and I did the exact same thing. So this is about 1/2 inch by roughly just shy of 2.5 inches. I just put adhesive on this little triangle that I scored and folded, and then I'm going to position it so that it's perpendicular to the fold of my card and that it's right next to the fold but not crossing over. You can see I only have adhesive on that little triangle. And when this gets closed, I'm going to fold this down so that that triangle adheres to what's the front of our card. And then the arm will kind of swing out when you open this card. And then when you fold it down flat, it flattens and is hidden underneath the panel. And that's your basic swing mechanism. And it's fun to kind of, since we have both sides to work from, it's fun to kind of use both. And the width of the pop-up mechanism also kind of helps to determine, how much space you have and how big your die cut can be that's hidden underneath. Because if I had made this less wide, I think I could have put maybe some different items in there so that when it swings out, you have a longer arm to attach something to. So you can see with these sort of basic mechanisms, this is the reason why I try to give measurements, but I'm trying to kind of explain how I arrive at these measurements so that you can adapt to whatever card you're making, because these are just very basic pop-up mechanisms. You don't need specialty dies or anything, and you can just cut them to fit or cut them to suit your design and what you want to achieve in the final scene. And so hopefully that helps to kind of give you an idea for if you're not using the exact same things that I'm using on my card, but you kind of like the idea of having this pop-up stage with 2 swing arms, you can adapt it to the things that you're crafting with and use whatever you have in your stash. So I'm just testing out my mechanism here a little bit, making sure that every time I go to attach something, glue something down, that it folds down flat and that it pops up and moves the way I want it to move, especially since I'm using liquid adhesive, because liquid adhesive does have that tendency to kind of ooze out a little bit. And so I want it to be strong and well stuck down, but I also want to make sure that that adhesive didn't ooze out anywhere and accidentally glue shut anything that should move. Now, I was thinking about adding like some kind of third element to that bottom right corner, and I thought maybe I would add a third envelope, because on the left I put 2 envelopes. And you know what's really cute is there's this little set of dies that it's actually like the smallest die, I think, in the large die of the month. So technically, I guess I did use the large die of the month a little bit, but it's a single die that has 2 die cut elements, 3 really, if you factor in the little heart, and it helps you to make these little wax seals that are super darling. And so I made a couple versions of it and added it to the cute little envelope. Now the envelope is from the small die of the month. The large die of the month does have an envelope that's larger actually than these small ones that I'm using. And so instead, or actually I think in addition, because I actually die cut another envelope out of gray as a third element, and I'm gonna stamp an extra sentiment on the inside. Now, you're still gonna see the part of the outside of the card, so it says open me for a smile, and I think just having that little snail pop out is just really darling. But I'm gonna stamp out this extra little sentiment that says snail mail hugs coming your way. I really like the sentiments that are part of the clear stamp of the month. They're really, really fun. And so I want to add this extra little envelope, trying to go with, like, you know, that rule of thirds, because I've got like a cluster of elements on the top left, a cluster, or not cluster, but my snail on the top right. And so just to move the eye down the card a little bit, I wanted to add another element right onto the card base itself. And that's why I didn't want the pop-up mechanism to be super big, because then I still have enough space at the bottom there to add some extra elements. So here is a final look at all of the cards that I made today. This is my flat card, which is featuring the clear stamp of the month. I used sort of a heat embossed resist method where I embossed in white and then I inked over the background. And all of my cards are inspired by Eclipse cards. And to keep this nice and flat, I actually adhered the letters through the front and into the inside of the card. It's still got a little bit of dimension, but I haven't broken my limit of 1 extra layer of cardstock. Then I have 2 flat cards. This is a bit of a 2-for-1 where I feature the glimmer of the month. So on the right, I have the positive, and then this one is I foiled the remnant. And then I did the exact same thing where I die cut the design with this lovely Stitch alphabet die set. But just to give a little bit of a twist on the Eclipse card, I actually swapped the letters so that you get high visibility of the sentiment, high in this case, but you still have the effect of that seamless design. And as I would typically do, I use some foam behind the letters to give it some extra dimension. My interactive card is a shaker card. So this is very similar to the first flat card where I die cut my sentiment, but then I glued the letters instead of inlaying them on top of the panel. I inlaid them to the inside of the card. So the letters "Hi" are cut through my little shaker element, and it's cut through my card base so that you see right through to the inside. And so you still have the seamless design, you get the extra fun of the shaker bits floating around, and you can still kind of appreciate that all over design. And this was a really fun one to make. It's a nice little twist on your standard Eclipse card that just kind of takes it up a notch. And so that is my interactive card. And finally, I have a pop-up card, which I don't know if there's a name for it, but it's basically a platform style of pop-up that on the outside you have that same sort of seamless design. In this case, I didn't die cut my sentiment, but rather just a shape. And so you still see all of that lovely embossed collage stamp style. I added the Open Me for a Smile, that's a glimmer plate from this month's Glimmer of the Month. And then I've got my platform with that sort of tilted panel and 2 swing arms attached so that you have that little bit of a surprise of the envelopes flying out and the little snail coming out as well. It would have been cool if the snail could be on the left and then the letters on the right so that you have snail mail, but but I think the snail makes more sense coming out from the right side just because of how he's positioned. But I thought it would have been a lot more cute if it was the reverse, and you could make it the reverse if you wanted to just flip your die cut over to the backside, but then you would have that rough edge of your die cut, which I don't like to use, so I just left it the way it was. But I had a lot of fun with this flip. It's a little bit of a 2-for-1, as I mentioned. So it's a flip of the Spellbinders April Club Kits and a flip of my recipe card 2 Eclipse cards. Thanks so much for checking out my video today. I'll leave links to everything in the description box below, and I'll link to where I show you how to make a very standard Eclipse card at the end of this video. Thanks again, and until next time, happy crafting and have a fabulous day. Bye!